Hello, I'm the real-life fake wizard. On March 6, 2026, Nintendo of America filed a lawsuit in the United States Court of International Trade against the United States Department of the Treasury, the Department of Homeland Security, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and the Department of Commerce. The complaint demands a full refund of every dollar Nintendo paid in tariffs imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, plus interest, and plus attorney's fees too. A lot of people have framed this as Nintendo versus Donald Trump, and maybe it is, but more so, this is a customs refund case filed by one of the largest consumer electronics importers in the United States, following a Supreme Court ruling that declared the tariffs in question illegal. Another point that people confuse about this isn't just Nintendo, as approximately 2,000 other companies, including FedEx, Costco, L'Oreal, Dollar General, and CVS, are pursuing the same claims through the same court. The total exposure for the United States government is approximately $166 billion in collected duties across more than 330,000 importers and 53 million individual entries. For this non-legal advice, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a fake wizard analysis, we're going to examine the background of this case, how the tariffs work, because most people don't know, explore the legal arguments of both sides, and then, what's more important than all of that, if Nintendo and the like were to win in court, what could it mean for you, for gamers, and the future of gaming? Today's indie game shoutout is The Troop, a turn-based platoon-level tactical game set in World War II. From the early hours of D-Day, play as British and Canadian or German forces in desperate fighting across Normandy. To learn more about this and hundreds of other indie games, visit our free indie game discovery network, fakeportal.com, or scan the QR code on your screen. Now back to the video. You know, most people have no idea how a tariff is paid, when the payment is made, or how it reaches the customers, right? This matters because this entire lawsuit hinges on the mechanics of import duties, and the public discourse around tariffs has been mostly dominated by misconceptions. So let's clear that up first. A tariff is a tax imposed by the United States government on goods entering into the country. It is not paid by the foreign manufacturer. It is not paid by the foreign government. It is paid by an American company that imports that product. In Nintendo's case, that company is Nintendo of America, headquartered in Redmond, Washington. Nintendo of Japan manufactures the hardware. Nintendo of America is the importer of record, meaning it is the legal entity responsible for bringing those goods into the United States and paying all the associated duties. When a shipment of consoles, accessories, or game cartridges, or game keycards, arrives at a US port, Nintendo of America, or its customs broker, files an entry with the US Customs and Border Protection. This entry declares the value, quantity, and classification of those goods. CBP then calculates the tariff based on the product's harmonized tariff schedule code, plus any additional duties imposed by presidential executive order. The harmonization codes are something you might only hear if you ever worked in logistics, but it's really important because the way that everything is classified and numbered and sorted, it really depends on what you pay at the end. You may use a code for video games and get one rate, or you may use another code for widgets and get another rate, and that is pretty important to know. Under normal trade conditions, video game consoles imported from Japan, where the Switch 2 is developed, face very low or zero base tariffs. The tariffs imposed by executive order in February 2025 added significant additional percentages on top of existing rates. For goods from China, tariffs reached as high as 125% for a time. Vietnam, where Nintendo has manufactured much of its hardware production, faced a 20% levy. Now, 20% might not sound like a lot, but it is, and that 20 extra percent needs to be paid from somewhere. And if you're Nintendo, you don't want it to hurt your sales margins. Nintendo of America pays the duty at the port. The cost is then absorbed or passed through to retailers or passed through to customers in the form of higher prices. Most companies do a combination of all three. Nintendo absorbed the tariff cost on the Switch 2 consoles, which remained at $449 throughout, but raised the prices on accessories by 5 to 10% and increased the price of every original Switch model in August 2025. The legacy system Switch OLED model went from $349 to $399. The standard Switch base one day one model went from $299 to $339. Okay, so to summarize, tariffs are not paid by foreign countries. They are paid by American companies at the port when they arrive, and then those costs flow downstream to American customers. The $166 billion collected came out of the accounts of American businesses. That is the money Nintendo and 2,000 other companies are now trying to get back. In February 2025, shortly after taking office for his second term, President Donald Trump issued a series of executive orders invoking the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, which I mentioned earlier. This is a statute designed to grant the president authority to regulate economic transactions during declared national emergencies. It has historically been used for targeted sanctions against specific countries or entities. The Trump administration used it to impose broad, sweeping tariffs on imports from dozens of countries simultaneously, framing the trade imbalances as the national emergency. And these tariffs were challenged almost immediately. Multiple lawsuits were filed arguing that the IEEPA does not grant the president the authority to impose tariffs. And on February 20th, 2026, basically a year later, the Supreme Court ruled that the president did not have the legal authority to impose tariffs under IEEPA, so the tariffs were struck down. This ruling is now binding precedent. The tariffs were illegal from the moment they were imposed, as per the Supreme Court. This Supreme Court decision, however, did not address the mechanics of refunds. It declared the tariffs unlawful and remanded the question of remedies to lower courts. This is where the current litigation exists with Nintendo. So what is Nintendo's case in all this? Are there claims? Do they have a case? Here's what they're claiming so far. Nintendo of America is the importer of record for every piece of Nintendo hardware, every accessory, and every game cartridge that entered the United States during the period in question, which is, again, that year. The company paid duties on all of these imports, and they are claiming that the tariffs directly disrupted Nintendo's business operations, forcing the company to delay Switch 2 pre-orders from April 9th to April 24th, 2025, while it had to assess the cost impact. So accessories were repriced. Legacy hardware was repriced. Supply chain planning was disrupted. Nintendo is seeking 4 things overall: a full refund of every duty paid since February 2025, interest at the statutory rate from the date of each payment, attorney's fees and costs, and declaratory relief confirming the tariffs were unlawful and ordering CBP to cease any remaining collection attempts. How about the government side? What does the US government have to say? Well, their position is not that the tariffs were legal, since the Supreme Court has already concluded that argument. The Supreme Court already ruled that those tariffs were illegal, so instead, the government will focus on minimizing the size, scope, timing, and cost of the refunds that they owe, and not only to Nintendo, but to those other 2,000 companies too. But moreover, why does this matter? Who actually benefits? And how does this affect gamers? So the lawsuit is framed as Nintendo seeking justice. It's corporations recovering money that was taken from them unlawfully, and that framing is legally accurate, so companies are fighting to get that money back. But follow the money here. Nintendo paid tariffs at the port. Nintendo raised prices on accessories and legacy hardware to offset those tariffs, leading to Americans paying elevated pricing, which they still are paying to this day. Now, Nintendo is suing to recover the tariff payments it already offset through price increases. If Nintendo wins, and it almost certainly will recover a substantial portion of what it paid, that money goes back to Nintendo, Not to you, and not to the person who paid $99.99 for Joy-Cons. Not to the family that paid $399 for a Switch OLED that was $350 6 months earlier. When asked whether a refund could lead to price reductions on peripherals, Nintendo's response to IGN was 5 words: "We have nothing else to share." Nintendo does not care about passing these savings back to the customers. They raised prices. They always want to raise prices. They keep trying. And Nintendo consumers paid for it all. Nintendo is double dipping their fries in the gamer community ketchup here, and if you look close enough, Nintendo has a sore on their lip. But let's go broader, right? Nintendo is not alone in this case. There are 2,000 companies looking for refunds so far, all of which paid the tariffs, raised their prices, and customers paid the offset difference. Corporations are suing for refunds on money they already recovered through elevated pricing. Oh, and the government's position is no better in this. In fact, it might be worse depending on who you ask. CBP collected $166 billion under authority it did not possess. That money came from American businesses who passed the cost to American consumers. The government is now arguing about procedural technicalities to limit how much it has to return and how quickly. Interest is accruing on all of this at $650 million per month. If this drags out past the end of 2026, the interest alone could reach $10 billion, all of which is paid for by the red-blooded American taxpayers. We're not even talking about how this impacted everybody else around the world. Nintendo and all the other companies raised prices worldwide on these things, claiming harsh economic conditions. But guess what? Turns out it was all poppycock. But let's zoom back into the American customer, the American gamer, who loses in every outcome. If the government wins on procedural grounds and limits the refunds, the corporations will keep the elevated prices, so the customer still pays more. If the corporations win full refunds with interest, the corporations recover the tariff costs that they paid, they get interest out of the American taxpayer, and keep the elevated prices. So the customer still pays even more in this place because they get the tax money too. If a global settlement is reached, the corporations receive a structured payout and still keep the elevated prices. Again, regardless of how this all goes down, there is no outcome in this litigation where the gamers see prices decrease. Once you prove you're willing to pay higher prices, they are locked in, branded in stone, final answer jeopardy. Nintendo does not care about giving you the best deal. Nintendo cares about extracting maximum revenue from every single transaction. The tariff situation was just a little extra leverage to raise prices, which again is something they always want to do. The same is true of every company in this docket, by the way. This is not just Nintendo, though Nintendo is the one we're talking about the most here. I would ask you, my friends, I would beg you here, do not think for a single second that any of this lawsuit controversy or tariffs or Nintendo is going to stick it to the US government or anything like that is going to benefit us in any way. And not just Americans here, everybody that's in gaming. These companies don't want a lot from you. They want everything from you. And even though you or someone you know paid $89 for your Pro controller, believing it really was because of harsh economic times, the truth always comes out. Neither companies nor government has your back, and you need to have your own back now. And the only way to do that is to stop giving these companies your money. Oh look, 2.2 million units sold in 4 days for Pokemon Pokopia? A game keycard exclusive? The game is only 6 gigabytes big. It's sold out everywhere until April? Wowie, right? I'm sure Nintendo is going to be more consumer-friendly now. Until next time, my friends, create, innovate, inspire others to do so as well, and for the love of God, cancel Disney+. See you later. Zug zug.